Good morning, everyone. As you're settling in, I'll remind everyone that we do still have Land Development Academy mugs that are available to any of our non-staff, non-city staff attendees who have attended 2 or more sessions. So if that's you, if you've been to 2 or more Land Development Academy sessions and you don't work for the city, go ahead and shoot me an email sometime and we can coordinate when you can come grab one of your limited edition Land Development Academy mugs. I know it's getting to be that busy time of year. So this is actually going to be our last session for 2025. But obviously we're still at the office and things. And so I feel like this is a good moment to, if you have time, come on by, grab your mug, and then we'll be firing up for more presentations in January 2026. So if you haven't met me yet, my name is Bianca Michuda, and I am a community engagement specialist for the Development Services Department, or Austin Development Services, as we now call ourselves. Thanks again to everyone for joining us here for the Land Development Academy. While today is the last presentation of 2025, I'll say it again, Land Development Academy is going to resume in January 2026, so keep your eye out for news. I'm sure that we'll be publicizing those sessions through our newsletter, the Building Connections newsletter, which is the Development Services newsletter. However, the Land Development Academy sessions offer a deeper look at the site plan review process, and we have experts from across the City of Austin departments who join us and talk about the work that they do with site plans. And I see our numbers are going up as everyone's joining. If you are here with a group, please go ahead and enter into the chat how many people are in the room with you if you're sharing a screen with multiple people. Otherwise, no need to tell us. We can see your attendance. We just want to make sure if anyone's name is representing more than one person that we count our attendees. So yeah, we'll do some housekeeping before we get started. I'll review the engagement format for our meeting today. If we could go to the next slide. So we have 1 hour set aside for today's program, and we'll start with a presentation and we'll close with the Q&A session. And during the presentation, questions can be posted to the Q&A bank at any time by selecting that option at the bottom of your screen. And there's a image there of what that Q&A box button looks like at the bottom of your screen. And otherwise, if you'd rather wait until the end, you can also raise your hand during the Q&A portion by finding that icon as well at your control panel. So we do have a packed presentation today. Kenna has prepared a lot of information for us. We may not get to all the questions, so I really do encourage you to submit them in the Q&A box, because if there's anything that we don't get to, we do form follow-up responses. We compile all of the questions and answers, and I send those out to all the attendees after the session. I also want to note that we are recording today's meeting, so you'll also receive a link to the presentation and the recording in the future. So with that, I'll go ahead and let Kenna Pierce take over and lead us into our last presentation of the year.
Hi, thank you, Bianca. Hi, I'm Kenna Pierce. I am the supervising engineer for the Drainage and Water Quality Review team. We are housed in the Land Development Review department, and my supervisor is Joydeep Goswami, which I'm sure everybody knows. He's been at the city a while, and our director is Keith Mars at Austin Development Services. So what I'm going to talk about today is drainage and drainage review. more specifically for like development applications. My team does site plans, subdivisions, zoning, building permits, exemptions, site plan corrections. We do it all. And I've got like a team of 13 if you count like public projects and land development. Oh, wait, they're called land use people, not the old LDIS. I can't remember their new name, which is my bad. But I have about 13 people, and drainage is our gig. So what is drainage review? Basically, drainage review is compliance with Title 25, Chapter 7, which is aptly named drainage. And what we do is we look at all the rules in Title 25, Chapter 7, and we figure out, is your development meeting those rules? Uh-oh. I'm frozen.
Cutting out.
I'm cutting
want-
out.
Let me just
Let me
ask the
see.
audience if they experience the same thing. Could you all please raise your hand if you had an audio glitch just now, or if that maybe it was just me? I just want to make sure. Okay, I got a comment that another attendee did not have that issue, so it could have just been me. I apologize. False alarm.
Okay. No worries. All right.
All right.
Just so you guys know, I'm communicating with Bianca on my phone because I basically can't see anything. So besides the PowerPoint. So if you need to let Bianca know, and then she'll let me know, right? All right, back to drainage review. So we're looking at compliance with Chapter 7, drainage, and a lot of the ways we evaluate whether you're meeting those requirements or the code is through DCM, Drainage Criteria Manual, and ECM, which is the Environmental Criteria Manual rules. So the goal of drainage review is to prevent, and this is really important, not increase localized flooding due to development. It's very specific, due to development. We do not want to increase localized flooding. That implies there is flooding. There is some localized flooding in Austin. We are all aware of it. We also want to ensure proper design of new drainage infrastructure, and specifically public infrastructure, protect existing drainage infrastructure. We also work to attain easements for the conveyance of public water in some sort of drainage infrastructure most of the time. And then we want to avoid increases in erosion due to development. This is a lot, right? I'm going to focus on the first goal that I have bolded, basically prevent or not increase localized flooding due to development for this particular presentation. So we're focusing on flooding, and you're like, how does flooding happen? Well, this is the Development Academy. So most people are here because they understand that, you develop a property. And what I mean is, like, you're going to build something, you're going to increase the amount of impervious cover on the ground. Most of the time, sometimes you can redevelop a property that already has impervious cover, but we're going to talk mostly about we're increasing the amount of impervious cover, and that results in a lower amount of water infiltrating into the soil, which causes water to come off the site in greater quantities and at greater speeds, right? This is what can particularly cause flooding or other problems, also known as adverse impacts. We're just going to put everything and call it adverse impacts. Drainage review is pretty complicated. I just wanted to point out, though, there's some other groups that do something, and you're like, isn't that also drainage review? Yes. There's floodplain review. So if you have a property that has a floodplain on it, which is basically a creek with 64 acres of drainage area, that's another team that reviews that. My team coordinates with them, but that team is the floodplain review, and they're housed in watershed protection. There's also the regional stormwater management review team that is also housed in watershed protection, and we have to coordinate with them a lot. But all of these teams, we basically regulate 25/7 drainage using the DCM and ECM. So it can be a bit confusing, but if you don't know who to email, you email me and I'll send you in the right direction. Why do we care about flooding? We care about flooding because we live in Flash Flood Alley. This beautiful town we live in has some steep topography on the west, which causes water to move really fast, downgrade. We also live in an area where we have these really intense rain events. We get a lot of rain in a small amount of time. So this quick and severe flooding risk has like an alley in Texas that's called Flash Flood Alley. And we really want to make sure we're protecting property and life through managing these storm events, managing floodplains, and making sure we develop in a responsible manner to where we protect property and life. There's just some pictures you've probably seen before. This is South Congress during the flooding event in 1935. Looks completely different from today, right? This is, I believe, Shoal Creek and the 81 Memorial Day floods. And then this is one of the big ones in 2013 in Onion Creek. So we have flooding in this town, and we are very, very serious about doing our best to protect property and life through our regulations. We have layers of regulations. One of the important ones is the state of Texas actually has regulations basically saying you can't flood your neighbor. So this is the language: no person may divert or impound the natural flow of surface waters in this state. You also can't permit a diversion or impounding, right? So that leads us to our city code. So we got the state code, and then now we have our city code. The county has code too. All the counties also have code. But the big one in chapter 7 for us is 61, which is specific criteria for the development applications. And there's a bunch of stuff in here. I'm going to hone in again on no adverse impact and to decrease flooding. So I'm going to look at A5A. So the development will not result in additional adverse flooding impacts on other property. So that's where I'm going to hone in on this entire PowerPoint. So that's the big one. And this one has been in play for, I think, since the 70s. It may not have always looked like this, but we've had some sort of version of no adverse impact for all development applications since the 70s. We had a new one instituted this year, very specific for residential infill, right? That's 25767. If you are residential infill, you might not need to meet all the code and criteria in 25.7 or code in 25.761. You might just need to meet 25.767. And 25.761 and 25.767 are very specific for your property. So if you are infill, and I'll talk about what that is later, you might be able to be reviewed under 25.767. So both of those are for on-site. So you're developing your property and you can't flood after you've developed your property from your site, other sites from your site. And then we have another one that we really look at to prevent flooding, which is basically you have water coming through your site and you have to allow it to continue through your site, because this prevents flooding upstream, right? So we don't want flooding resulting from your site, nor do we want your site to cause flooding upstream because you're blocking development. So that's 25.7.151, which basically says that if you have water coming through your site, you have to allow it to flow through your site. And you're going to have to give an easement because it's considered public water. So these are the three regulations that, these are the three regulations that I'm going to hone in on that basically we look at during development review to make sure the development is not causing adverse impact. And that's really technical, right? Like, what does this mean? What does this mean? We want to make sure that your development is not causing adverse impact or increasing adverse impact. If you're in a part of town that floods already, we don't want it to flood anymore. We may not be able to fix the flooding with this development, but we don't want to increase it. Or if you're in a part of town but you don't have any flooding, you shouldn't have any flooding afterwards. So basically, a development cannot create additional adverse flooding impact. And you're like, okay, I just want to build a house. What does this mean? How does this increase in flows from your site? How are these flows mitigated? And how can I show that I'm not causing adverse impact, right? What does this look like and how is this evaluated? So I'm going to go through these 4 questions. So what does this mean? Again, I've mentioned earlier, a development cannot increase flooding downstream, upstream, or from their site. So number 1, a development cannot increase flooding or the timing, cannot increase the flow or the timing of water leaving from your site. So we're going to look at your site. We're going to see how much impervious cover you're getting, putting down, and you're going to have to mitigate and make sure that you do not increase the flow or timing from your site. A development cannot block flow upstream that goes through the site in existing conditions. So I mentioned this one before. If you're putting stuff down on your site, you can't like put a big retaining wall here and block the water coming through, which would either back up onto that property and cause flooding, or the water, you know, goes downhill. It'll go around and cause flooding on other properties that originally didn't have water on it. So that's the upstream. And then finally, once you do develop your property, how do you discharge it in a responsible manner to not create adverse flooding impacts? So we're going to look at it from on-site, upstream, and downstream. And I just have examples here in case you're like, oh, this is like the first time I've ever looked at, like, thought about water leaving my property and where it goes. So basically, like, water's now leaving. So say after development, if water is now leaving to a different property where the water didn't go there, then you're causing adverse flooding impacts. Like, I have a house, they built a giant house next door. Never happened in this town. Build a giant house next door. Now the water from the house next door is being pushed onto my property because they changed the grade. That's an adverse flooding impact, right? Or increases in water surface elevations or the height of water. A lot of times this is more easily like conceptualized in a creek. I have a creek in the back of my house. They built a giant big box store upstream, and that's a lot of impervious cover. Now the water from my creek comes up further onto my property. The water surface elevations increased as a result of that property being developed and built. That is an adverse impact. You're not allowed to do that. Water flowing faster in post-development. That is, well, my neighbor's water always flowed to my site, but it took several days. Now it's coming like basically hitting the ground and then hitting my lot. That is an adverse impact. And then water not being allowed to flow in the existing conditions, which I've mentioned multiple times, like that's an adverse impact. We don't want to have any of these. So what do? We regulate development through these. These are the 3 main ones in the chapter 7, of the Land Development Code. 25761, which basically applies to every development except qualifying infill. And then the new one, 25767, which only applies to residential qualifying infill. I didn't put that in there. And then we have the upstream 25751. You're like, all right, I know the rules. How do I figure out whether I'm following these rules or how to mitigate for my increase in flows? Because I know it's going to happen. How do I mitigate for it? So for 25761, the rules are there, but you have to go to the drainage criteria manual for some ideas on how to mitigate. For 25767, it's our new one. The rules are actually right there in the code. And they're also going to be added to the drainage criteria manual. We're in the process of doing that. And 25.7, 151, the rules are in the code. So we're going to look at these three. And we're going to start with residential infill because it's kind of the easiest and most simplified, and it really applies to the least number of developments because you have to be considered residential infill. And that is defined in the land development code in chapter 1. There's like a whole section of definitions, and this is definition 97. It says residential infill project means a development of a site not exceeding 1 acre. So that's the first rule. And then you have a 5 to 16 dwelling units. So 1 acre, 5 to 16 dwelling units. Or you can have 1 acre of a re-subdivision property, which has to be zoned SF 1, 2, or 3, is already platted and does not require a vacation. So these are super specific. They are not going to, the gas station that's going to go down the street is not going to meet these, right? The new big box store, the new HEB, they're not going to meet these. These are very specific for like maybe like I own a house. It's an SF3. I want to come in and build another house, but I want it to be on its own lot because I don't want to have an HOA. I could be considered residential infill according to this definition because my property is already platted. It's a single family 3 zoned, and I don't require a plat vacation. But I mean, there are lots of these properties around town, but not many people are going to want to do this. And then the 5 to 16 dwelling units, that's also very specific. So I just want to be really clear about this is a very small section of development out there. So if you belong to this very small section of development, it qualifies you for a number of rules that are really helpful to allow you to get your projects hopefully approved and built faster and cheaper. And there are some like site plan things that you get out of. There are some subdivision things you get out of. And for drainage, it means you might be able to apply to use the modified drainage standards, which are below. And again, the first letter says you have to be a residential subdivision. And then B says basically you have to meet these rules. And one of the rules is you can't be more than 17,780 if you're a subdivision, right? And then the second rule says you have to make sure that all your water goes to the right of way or a public existing storm drainage system. Okay. So I just want to make it very clear. You can actually be residential infill and still not get your modified drainage standards. I'm going to look at that on the next slide, but say you are residential infill and your water's flowing to the road, then you are showing you're not causing an adverse impact because you're meeting these rules. The rule is you can't increase flooding. And in the case of residential infill, this is what the city of Austin sees as not increasing flooding, right? So let's look at an example. This is super helpful for people like, that just, I don't want to say Joe Schmo, but, like if I want to go in and subdivide my property and build a house for my brother next behind me because he can't get a job. Whatever, family, right? This is super easy for me because I actually don't require an engineer because all I have to show is that my water is graded, my land, my property is graded for the water to go to the road. And that's what we have on the left. Say I'm where that number 2 or the number 7 is, this is my property. I want to subdivide it and put 2 houses there. And my water is already flowing to the road. And in my developmental application, I'm going to have a grading plan that shows that the water still flows to the road. If I can do that, I qualify for the modified drainage standards. And I don't have to provide any other mitigation to show that I'm not creating adverse impacts. And I put that here as detention. Usually detention, like holding the water on your property, is what you do to prevent adverse impacts for a certain period of time. And we'll talk about that later. So that's great for me, right? I don't have to pay an engineer. That's amazing. But what happens if my land doesn't slope towards the right of way? And that's what we have here on the right. I'm sorry if I said right earlier. That's what we have on the right. As you can see, these orange lines, which I did not define for you, these are contours, and this red arrow is how the water flows. Water flows perpendicular to the contour line at a right angle, right? So if I am this house on the corner of Edgewood and French Place, my water flows to my neighbor, not the right of way. And my neighbor's water flows to his neighbor, not the right of way. And if I wanted to come in and redevelop this property and subdivide it, unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to qualify at this time, looking at these contours, for the modified drainage standards, because I can't show that my water is going to the right of way or other public drainage infrastructure. It goes to my neighbor. That's private property. So we're going to have to, in this case, on the right, mitigate for the fact that I'm going to be increasing the flow and this quantity and possibly the timing of water from my site. So I would have to probably do something like provide detention. So that is the simplest basic like drainage regulations we have. It's very specific for residential infill. Not all residential infill actually qualifies for it. If it doesn't qualify for it, lucky you get to fall under 25.761. And this is much more complicated, and it basically is for all development, and you're going to need an engineer to come in and sign and seal things. Just making sure she's not texting me. Okay. So basically all developments that do not meet the definition of residential infill and residential infill projects that cannot, I have a typo, meet 25.767, all have to show adverse impact on under 25.761. So basically, you cannot cause adverse impacts. How do I do that? You're going to go look in the DCM to see what your options are. These are your mitigation options. And back in the background, I have the DCM. 122 is our big important section for this. And it has a bunch of stuff in here, a bunch of stuff. It all has to do with adverse impacts in some way or the other. For instance, the first one is basically telling you, because I've been telling you, oh, you can't increase water from your site. Well, how do we quantify that water? Do we have any standards for that? Why, yes, we do. You have to look at the different storms, right? And you have to show that these storms are not causing adverse impact. And the storms are the 2-year storm, the 10-year storm, the 25 and the 100-year. And these are basically standard wherever you go get a permit, whatever city, whatever state. These are the standard storms a lot of people use if they have flooding issues and regulations. And this is kind of like really conceptual, but basically you have a certain amount of precipitation that you use to model the 2-year storm. You have a larger amount of precipitation that you use to model the 25. And then of course the 100-year is the most precipitation. You put it in your little model and you figure out how much water is coming off of your site. So these are our regulatory storms. And just to note, the 2-year storm is way more common than the 100-year storm. I think the 2-year storm has a 50% chance of happening, whereas the 100-year storm is a 1% chance of happening. And I don't know if you've noticed when you drive around town and you see detention ponds, after the rain, you're like, it's not full. Is it doing its job? Well, most likely we didn't get a 100-year storm, right? But our ponds are designed to hold that big storm because That's the storm we've decided that we're going to regulate to. B and C are rules about public drainage infrastructure. So I'm not going to focus on that too much, but I will focus on D. This is our really important one. And this is basically how you mitigate for your development. You can't increase the flows being discharged from any point of your site. This is our basically, we just call it no increase in flows. So this is what you have to do to meet the no adverse impact in the land development code. Section E gives you the option. You can mitigate with a detention pond or participating in something called the Regional Stormwater Management Program, right? Detention pond, it says on or off site, because some developments have their own pond and some developments belong to a larger group of development and they have a common pond. And then sometimes there are really large regional ponds. So no increase in flows. You have to mitigate with a detention pond or participating in RSMP, which I really won't go into too much here. Or you could be special, very special, except in these special geographic areas. In these geographic areas, you don't have to provide detention because your flows leaving your site aren't going to cause any adverse impacts. And that's along the lake somewhere, whether it's called Lady Bird Lake, the Colorado River, or whatever else that beautiful body of water going through the town is called. If you're in a certain area in Waller Creek watershed, which is downtown, we have a giant tunnel they spent millions of dollars building, which will basically is sized to take your flows so you don't have to detain. And then the modified drainage standards are also going to go under section F in the future. I wanted to put this in here. This is G and H. It's just for I didn't want to forget it because it's part of 122. But section G is about the Regional Stormwater Management Program. That's not my group. I'm not going to go over it. If you want more information on this, let us know. And then H has to do with Atlas 14. So in 2018, they came out with new precipitation data that now we have to use, and it started to be in effect in 2019 for floodplain, and I think it was spring of 2020 for drainage. And if you have an old pond, you need to look at H, but I'm not going to focus on that. What I'm focusing on, no adverse impact, 25761 comes to the DCM 122 to figure out how to mitigate it. And you're like, okay, what does this look like, right? So what this basically looks like is I have this beautiful development off of William Cannon and Mopac, and I put a bunch of impervious cover down. So I am definitely increasing the amount and the velocity of water leaving my site. So what do? I pop it into a detention pond, right? Because that was one of the options, a detention pond to hold the water and slow it down, and then slowly release it to the public drainage infrastructure, right? This one also has a water quality pond. I know some of you know that I also do water quality, so I had to mark it in here. But the detention pond and the water quality pond are shown in this GIS map. So that's the big one that my group looks at most of the time. I put in here RSMP for completeness, but I don't have a picture because it's hard to picture that. And the last one, I'm in one of these special areas. I'm on the right. I'm in one of these special areas and I can just release my flows because that's no adverse impact in these special areas. So I just showed these developments along, I think this is the Lady Bird part of the lake. And as you can see, this one on the right has this pink water quality pond. So all this impervious cover goes to the water quality pond to be treated. And after the water quality volume is done, because you only have to treat a certain amount, the rest of it just goes to the lake. You don't have to detain it at all because the lake is not going to be really affected by that small amount of water, right? So that's what's considered no adverse impact. And those are under 122F. Everybody else has to meet 122D, which is no increase in flows, and provide some sort of detention pond, unless you're doing RSMP, which I'm not talking about in this PowerPoint slide. So that's your on-site stuff. We went through residential infill, on-site, 25.761, which is on-site. And this is just a little bit of the upstream stuff. And I just put the same code in here, but I just wanted to give you a picture. So again, if you remember, you can't block the water upstream. And what does that look like? This is kind of I was really struggling with finding the right picture here in a very short period of time, of course. That's what this looks like. This is an area off of South First and Ladybird Lake. And you're like, well, they don't have to provide detention. They don't have to provide detention. But in this particular instance, there's this area to the south, and I labeled it offsite. Hopefully you can see that. And that flows downhill, right, through this other property that's between it and the lake. So this other property is not allowed to block this flow. And it's a bit challenging to see, but on the left, there's these red lines and there's a pipe in there. So they've actually collected the water in a pipe and piped it through their property in order to meet 25.7.151, so they don't flood properties upstream of them. So that's what this looks like. Some sort of conveyance infrastructure and an easement, right? An easement is an area of land that is dedicated to the city of Austin for the public benefit. In this case, it's a water conveyance. So that's a lot. Those are the rules. Well, I'm in for development. How are these rules evaluated? Like, what do I have to show you, Kenna, to make sure that we are demonstrating that we have no adverse impact? And the big way you do that is through using drainage area maps. This is an example of just like the watersheds in the city, not all of them, but and a watershed is basically an area that flows to the same end point. And so we have drainage area maps, and that's kind of what we want to know. But we mostly want to know it for your site, but I wanted to put in here that there are different scales of drainage area maps. This one right here is like on a floodplain wide scale, right? All of this water in this light blue shape is for East Bowdoin Creek, and it flows to East Bowdoin Creek into Ladybird Lake. You can also have, for development review, depending on your property, you might need to show like a larger drainage area map than just your site because you have off-site flow. So this is an example. The yellow is a little park up in the Lakeline Mall area, and that's the site. But in this case, we have all of this other area where the water flows to a creek and that creek goes through the park. So this is more of like a regional approach. So if you were to just turn in just the site, this is your on-site drainage area map. So it's really dependent on what your property, it depends on the property, what kind of map you need to turn in. We always want an on-site drainage area map. Don't turn in a floodplain drainage area map for us because we're not going to know what to do with it, right? We always want an on-site drainage area map for my review. If you have off-site, then you also need to show that. And then you're like, I don't know what drainage area maps are, or, I don't really know tons about it. That's fine. This is an example of a drainage area map. They should have contour lines. They should have like drainage areas that, like a common area that flow to the same point. And we kind of conceptualize everything at a point that might not really mimic what goes on in real world, but that's one of the ways we do it. It quantifies how much water. Usually there's a bunch of calculations on here, and they have the amount of flows coming off at point of analysis A, 10 CFS, right? They can demonstrate the limits of the flow of water. they show the different surface materials. You don't see it on this one, but I mean, you can kind of tell that this big area, PR1, is basically impervious cover. This area along the, let's just call it the east side, is a more natural area because they have a creek running through here. It shows your piping systems, your ponds. This is a pond in kind of the middle upper left. And we use these to figure out, well, how big does your detention pond need to be? How much water do you need to detain on your site and slowly release in order to mitigate for your flows? Yeah, you need an engineer to do this. They have to stamp it, they have to sign it, they seal it, they got to run an electronic model, especially if you have a pond. A special note, I keep saying impervious cover, impervious cover. Impervious cover, things like buildings, asphalt, concrete, anything you can drive on is considered impervious cover also. And we have this special caveat in 25.8, which is the environmental section, that certain types of impervious cover, they just don't really count. That is not for drainage calculations. That's like a special theoretical thing. But for drainage calculations, we're using calculations. And if your surface does not allow water to infiltrate, it's considered impervious cover, and you need to put it in your drainage area maps. That's just something that we frequently have questions on. And if you have more questions on it, you can email me, not a problem. But I just wanted to put that in here because it is often an area of conflict, especially with like sidewalks. Yes, you don't have to treat the sidewalk for water quality purposes, but it's still impervious for drainage calculations. So you might have to somehow mitigate an increase in flow, right? Very unpopular, right? That's not my fun part of the job. So let's look at for upstream, because I want to include it for completeness. Thank you. So this is an example of an easement with a pipe because this property has offsite flow, let's say coming from the left side. They have to capture it. You can see this slight grading here. And then I've attempted to highlight the pipe blue so it's easier to see. And then the yellow section is the easement. And easements are a real struggle. I understand like property owners are like, oh, I don't want to have an easement. And that's a big, and I completely understand because that easement has to be big enough where the city can come in and maintain the infrastructure, and you can't put anything in it. No buildings. You can sometimes put parking lots over it and stuff, but like any sort of vertical structures, dumpsters, all sorts of stuff, retaining walls, that stuff gets in the way of maintaining the infrastructure in that easement, and you can't put it in there. And this comes up with like residential housing also. You go in and you want to build, you want to maybe increase the size of your house, and you got an easement. And I particularly, and on my lot, I have a cable easement, and then I have a gas line easement in the back, which severely limits what I can build on my site, right? So this is an example of an easement, and this is the pipe in the easement on the bottom. And if you're like, well, how much do I need to dedicate? That is given in the DCM, the Drainage Criteria Manual. You have this table. It is not a secret. It depends on the size of the pipe and how deep the pipe is. And these numbers in the middle, like 25 feet, 30 feet. If you're developing a property, I understand you always want to be on the small end, and the smallest is 20 feet, right? But again, we do this because we are very serious about no adverse impact and not causing flooding upstream, right? This is an example of a development that has a bunch of easements. The biggest one shown here is the floodplain, right? You can't build in here. Your property would just flood. We also want this in an easement. And then any properties that flow through another property to get to this creek, that other property has to provide an easement, right? So we're going to look a little bit more about basically detention ponds. And then I know I need to probably wrap this up super fast. So I'm going to go a little quicker. So no adverse impact. I'm going to hone in on detention ponds here. So you're putting impervious cover down. Like in the top one, it's grass, right? You can see that there's nothing built on this property. The bottom picture, they put a giant building and a parking lot there. Now we have to mitigate for the increase in flows, and that blue shape is their detention pond. All of their water is going to go to their water quality, then spill over into the detention pond. And that detention pond is going to hold that water for a certain period of time and release it at the same rate that water is being released from the site in most cases, depending on the modeling. But you're like, what's a detention pond? It's basically a storage basin that impounds a volume of water with a controlled metered outlet. That's really important. You have to control how fast and how much water leaves the pond. We don't have a lot of very specified rules for detention ponds. We leave it pretty open, but it has to be a big area that holds water with a metered outlet. You have to demonstrate that all the water that needs to get there from your site can get there. So some examples are just basically a big hole in the ground. You might not have noticed. You might notice now when you drive around town, there are a bunch of detention ponds everywhere, and they take up space on your site. You want to develop your site, that detention pond is going to take up space, but it is also going to keep your property and your neighbor's property safe from flooding impacts. Other things, if you want to save space, you can do subsurface detention ponds. Private property has detention ponds. I'm a city worker. I need to widen South First Street. I'm going to have to provide a detention pond, most likely, especially if it's an area that is all green, because I'm increasing impervious cover. I don't get out of this because I'm the city of Austin. The city has to obey the same rules, right? So we'll have to provide a detention pond either within the right of way somewhere, or we'll have to get an easement from a neighbor to put the detention pond on. So it's very important. I want to make sure that you guys understand that the city has to meet the same rules that we expect private development to meet. So I said the detention pond is pretty basic. We don't have lots of like special rules for them. Basically, they need to be big enough, which is contain the 2, the 10, the 25, and the 100-year storms. They have to empty in 24 hours. And that's because we want it to be empty in case there's another storm that comes the next day. If you do a detention pond, you are required to have an electronic model, and then we're going to look at your outflow structure. So what is your weir? How big is it? Do you have a pipe? And this picture on the right is basically the outflow for a pond. A weir is this square notch, and then the point discharge is right there from that pipe. So again, I love to look at detention ponds around town. My kid is actually kind of over it, but that's too bad, right? He needs to see all the detention ponds around town. This is a really big one at that beautiful development on William Cannon and Mopac, which I'm quite fond of. You don't have to be, but I am. This is another one. This is one of the city detention ponds at a park. You can find them on GIS. Like if you're like, does my Walgreens have a detention pond? You can actually go look it up on property profile. Privately maintained detention ponds are pink, and then publicly maintained detention ponds are this green stripy colors. This is Barton Springs right here. This is Zilker up to the top, and this like the baseball fields on the other side. You might not realize that, but that's in a giant detention pond, right? Because it's just so big and it's so shallow and it's so flat, you don't even notice it until you look at GIS. This is what it looks like from the parking lot. That's a detention pond. It is meant to hold water, right? we have a bunch of smaller ones around town. This is Stastny and South First. As you guys can tell, I live down south. This is a detention pond along South First Street, and then we've got these along Stastny. We've got one behind this building. These are all privately maintained ponds, as they're pink for these businesses. I think this is Walgreens and O'Reilly's and the Dollar Tree maybe. But they came in for a development application, and we're like, oh, you're increasing your flow from your site. You need a detention pond. They probably also have water quality ponds. This is what it looks like in real life if you're driving by. I mean, I didn't even notice these things. Maybe that was my bad, right? But now I see them everywhere. These are some really interesting ones right here. This is on William Cannon and Manchac, I think. This little triangle is parking lot detention. So if you park your car here and it storms, a large enough storm to actually need detention, your car is in the detention pond. And we have rules for that. Like it only can be an average of 8 inches in depth. They're super interesting. This is this little, I think it's Betos. So this little corner is the detention pond, and this is the outlet right here. Right? This is a little detention pond in front of CVS, I believe. Again, it's so subtle, might not have even noticed it. And then one thing I just really didn't mention until now, we've got upstream, we've got on-site. How your water leaves the site is very important, and that's downstream. Most of the time, if possible, we prefer you to connect to the storm sewer. Whether the storm sewer is sized for it or not, please connect. Discharge to a creek or a body of water, that can also be considered like a connection. Discharging to the right of way, like this pond right here. No, let me find this one. Yeah, this one right here. This goes right into the right of way. And so does this CVS. You can tell that right here is the discharge for that pond, this little concrete thing coming out to the bottom. It goes right into William Cannon. There's no storm sewer in this part of William Cannon. So that's part of our job. We need to look at that. We need to make sure that it's being released at a rate that is not causing traffic problems, right? So on some level, connecting to a pipe is like the best scenario, because otherwise we're really looking at your discharge and making sure it doesn't cause any safety conditions. Another thing with discharging, like if your water flows to your neighbor's property in existing conditions, it's going to flow to it in proposed conditions. And we really look at it then also. I believe I'm running out of time. Am I not, Bianca?
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left, and
Okay.
it's up to everyone here. I mean, if y'all have time to stay on, we can still do question and answer. But yeah.
I basically, yeah, I mean, this is just infrastructure. And then I'm basically done. So, yeah. I asked you that, and then I basically told you I was done. So let me just talk about this one slide first. So this is just an information, like basically we have storm infrastructure around town to capture these flows, to take these flows. And then that's just a picture. And then I wanted to bring out that my team does other things. We also do erosion hazard zone review, erosion mitigation, to your storm, and public infrastructure and water quality. So there we go. Sorry about that kind of clunky ending. Back to you, Bianca.
Thank you. It's a lot of information, and we do have some questions here, so let's get started on those. If anyone else would like to ask questions, feel free to either raise your hand with the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, or enter your question into the Q&A box. And I'm going to go ahead and start reading the questions that were submitted during the presentation. So our first question is, you mentioned adverse impact of increased velocity. How do you account for the adverse impact of sheet flow from the height of a building upon flow and erosion, especially stream bank erosion?
So I think I'm understanding your question. I'm very visual and I'm not looking at the question, so I apologize. Okay, so if water is flowing off of a building that has been placed there, that water first should be going to some sort of pond. If it's a situation where you don't have a pond, that's one thing. But it should be going to some sort of pond to be detained. And then the discharge from that pond, we look at the discharge from the pond. If it's going to a creek, and I didn't go over these criteria. Again, there's so much, but there are rules for the way flow can be discharged to a creek, right? We have a velocity. We have a velocity maximum, so 6 feet per second is considered greater than 6 feet per second is considered erosive. So we would make the engineer demonstrate that the water is flowing to the creek at less than 6 feet per second. We also would look at the drop, right? The higher the drop, the more erosion. We would also consider the angle that it would be flowing. But if it's like specifically flowing from the building onto the ground into the creek, I think I would need to look at that more to see the case, because first of all, that implies that they don't need detention. It also implies that they don't have gutters. Like if it's a residential building, I can see that, like a house, I can see that scenario more for a house. And then you're not talking about that much flow if you're just a house. But if it's like a larger development, you should be providing detention. And then we're looking at how you discharge. I know that if you walk around town, there are so many pipes just sticking out going into the creeks, causing tons of erosion. And we're trying to mitigate for that now. I don't know what the rules were in the past, but we do have a bunch of rules for that now. And my group is not the only one that looks at them. So.
Great. I think that was good. That made sense to me. I was thinking the same, and it would imply that there's no gutters, and I guess it would depend on the surface area of the building and all that. So,
Yeah.
all right, next question. Where can one find a list of the RSMP locations within the Barton Creek zone? Or are all properties required to treat water unless under the allowance of Chapter 245, which exempts pollution controls? How close must the RSMP pond be located? Okay, so this sounds like it's almost multiple questions in one.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
the RSMP ponds be green striped on property profile? So
Are we talking about in the Barton Springs zone or Barton Springs Park?
this is written as Barton Creek zone. I guess that would be the water quality zone.
Okay. Okay. So we're talking about two different things here, right? There's water quality regulations and then there's detention regulations. The Barton Springs zone, which is the southwest part of town, which comprises of some of Slaughter watershed and also Williamson Creek watershed, and then Barton Springs watershed, has very stringent water quality control regulations, right? And so basically, if you are a developer and you have a property there, you have limited amount of impervious cover that you can put down. And then you also have these stringent water quality control requirements. That's different than detention. And the regional stormwater management program has to do with like drainage and detention versus water quality regulations. If you have a pond in the Barton Springs zone, it is not automatically a city maintained pond. A lot of them are privately maintained, detention and water quality controls. Did I hit the question, Bianca, or is there more?
You've got a lot of aspects to it. I mean, this was a pretty big
Yeah.
question. I mean, a set of questions, and that's actually my fault for kind of lumping them. I could have separated them a little bit better myself. But I think the main question was, where could you find a list of the RSMP locations within that zone?
Okay. So RSMP is the Regional Stormwater Management Program. You can actually look on property profile and there's like a layer. You can click that layer on and you can see the properties all over town that have gotten RSMP, right? If you are new to development and you're like, want RSMP has a website that you can go on and you can plug your address in, and they will tell you whether this property in this location is a good candidate for RSMP. So I'm trying to figure out. So on GIS, there is a list of there's a layer so you can see all the properties that have it. If you are interested in getting it, then you would go to RSMP's website and they have an RSMP viewer to go figure out whether your property is good or not. And they also probably have that same layer showing all the other properties that have RSMP.
Okay, and so then following up on that, would
Mhm.
those RSMP ponds be green striped on property profile? Or I guess on GIS, I think those pictures were actually from
Yeah.
GIS.
Yeah. So not necessarily just because okay, so RSMP is never a pond. That's very important. Like if you are wanting RSMP, then you have shown that you do not have adverse impacts downstream, and that is not a pond. Because if you're going to do a pond, you're just doing detention and you don't do RSMP. RSMP, you have to pay money to get RSMP, and then it always goes with your property. Detention, you pay money through like providing a pond, but you're not writing a check out to the city. So they're kind of two different things. If you have RSMP, you're not going to have a pond. You might be talking about water quality ponds, which are almost always required in the Barton Spring zone, unless you have vested rights, which is through that 245. But again, if you have a water quality pond, it is not necessarily city maintained. For instance, there are a bunch of private developments in the Barton Spring zone. They have an operating permit from the city for their Barton Spring zone infrastructure, but the city does not maintain it. The city inspects it, and the developer maintains it, or the owner maintains it.
Great. That made sense to me. And that was the distinction, as part of the question was about, like, it wanted to be about drainage, but it was really about water quality. And then I think just the clarification of the map, the RSMP not being a pond, I think that was all getting to the points of the questions. And we'll clean that answer up. We'll format it really nicely in the Q&A summary. But I think that was a great starting point for us right now. We are past noon, and so I don't want to drag this out too much farther, just to respect everyone's time. I do see some people have left. If you could please go to the next slide. So I just want to kind of wrap it up, and I do want to reassure there are a couple more questions in the box. We will get to those, and all of the questions and answers will be sent out to our attendees today. So don't lose your interest in this subject, because I can't wait to hear the answers. I'm lucky that I get to work on the back end and see I get to see the answers before I send them out to everyone. But anyways, thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you, Kenna, for all this amazing information. If you all have an extra moment, please do scan the QR code that's there. Let us know what you thought about today, about our engagement today. In the meantime, if you really miss us while you're waiting for our new sessions happening in 2026, visit our website, because there you can find all the recordings for everything. We'll be posting today's recording there eventually as well. And I think that's everything that I have for now. Any closing words for us, Kenna?
No, if you guys have questions, just please feel free to email me. And again, I can answer them or send you to someone who definitely knows more than me, right? And let Bianca know if you want to know about anything else, because I really did hone in on one thing for drainage review.
Yes, I'm always accepting suggestions for topics. We do have a lot of the coming year planned out, but I'm always got my ears open for new ideas. And so thank you all, and I want to wish you all happy holidays if I don't see you before then. I feel like it's right around the corner. And I can't wait to regroup in the new year, but we will stay in touch again. Any questions or concerns, you're always free to you're always welcome and free to email us, and we'll be in touch. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.